Welcome, guys, to yet another episode of Parvez's Trade. My name is Parvez Khan, and on this episode, I would like to talk about something that I've been actually thinking about for quite a while, and something that I feel the society as a whole, the world as a whole, ignores and doesn't give uh, importance to, and that is the destruction of the middle class. I think most of the problems of the world we live in, most of the problems boil down to the destruction of the middle class. And it's not just the current world. I'll explain where my philosophy comes from. I think if you look through history, empires rise and empires fall, and societies crumble when the middle class gets destroyed. So yeah, it's if you guys are interested in learning more, please subscribe and like this video. And so it'll be probably a 10 or 12 series playlist. I hope you guys watch all parts of this playlist. This is an important one. And yeah, let's get going. So, first of all, when we talk about the middle class, right, you have to understand that there is no specific definition of what a middle class is in society. And on average, it's just someone who has around 60% to 200% of the nation's median income, not the mean income. So when you look at the GDP per capita, for example, of any country, that's the mean, the average. You add up all the incomes of everyone and you divide them by the population. That's the average, that's the mean. But when it comes to defining the middle class, I couldn't find an exact definition because it's such a vague term. But the best definition I could find out there, it's a class of people whose income is around 60% to 200% of the median income of the country, not the mean. And the median is different because in the median statistical analysis, what you're doing is basically you're piling up the numbers in an ascending order from small to largest, and you're trying to find the center number, the number that's in the center of all these numbers. And so, why would median income and mean income be different? Well, it would be different. It would be vastly different if the society is unequal. And I'll give you an example. So let's say you have a country, for example, country A has five people. Okay, one person makes $10,000, another 20, another 30, another 40, another 50, and let's find the mean and the median. Okay, the mean would be you add them up and you divide them by the number of people, five. So 10, 20 is 30, 30, 30, 60. 60 plus 40 is 100, and the 100, So you divide that by five, you're left with the mean income of $30,000 per person in country A. Okay, what would be the median? So that's the mean, right? The mean is you add up all the incomes, you divide by the number of people, you get the mean income, which is $30,000 in this case. What will be the median? So median, you're trying to find the middle number after arranging all the numbers in ascending order. So you have 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000. And the middle number is 30,000. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So there's two numbers to the right of 30 and two numbers to the left of 30. So 30 is the middle number. So the median and the mean are equal in this case. Now let's look at another situation. Country A, five people. One person's income is 10,000, another person's income is 20, another person's income is 30, another person income is 40, and another person income is 100,000. So only the last person we changed the income from 50,000 to 100,000. Okay, he's extremely rich. And in this situation, what's the mean? You add the numbers up, you get 200,000, you divide them by five, you're left with 40,000. That's the mean. What's the median? You pile up the numbers in ascending order, you get the center number, which is 30,000. So the mean the GDP per capita is 40,000, but the median number is actually 30,000. So that's just a simple example I gave. And now if you spread this out into a society where the top 1%, for example, in US, the top 0. Top 1%, I believe, in US owns more than 50% of the nation's wealth. So you can understand why when you're calculating the GDP, it's not a true reflection of how wealth is distributed. And median is actually a better example, better use of in picturing the distribution of wealth, not me. And so, yeah, let's get back to what we're talking about. So, the middle class is defined in simplest terms as class of people whose income falls within 60% to 200% of the nation's median income. Ooh. And so, for a country, well, let's first go through history here. So, for example, Rome. Rome had a beautiful middle class, okay? And that's what led to the glorious, prosperous times in Roman Empire. But towards the end of the Roman Empire, when Rome crumbled, okay, a foreign army, a barbaric army, plunged their way through Roman gates, through the city of Rome, through all the provincial states. By that time, everyone was so poor, so broke, that they actually welcomed the barbarians. So you went from an empire which had a prosperous middle class to by the time the barbaric army ran their way through Rome, ran their way through the provincial states, they were seeing a bunch of people who were welcoming them because they had been stolen and uh, abused so harshly by the Roman government, taxed so heavily, and basically just, they've been made poor by the Roman government. So how did that situation come about? How did an empire like Rome go from having a prosperous middle class to having Roman citizens turn their backs on the government and welcoming the barbarians because they're so broke and they've been basically taxed to poverty by the Roman government? Well, the it starts with, as it always does, manipulating the currency, right? In Roman times, just like in any other empire, they had it started with a gold standard. And then they started mixing copper and other silvers in the new coins that they issued. And the coins got smaller and smaller in size. And to the end of the Roman Empire, it was basically a copper coin. There was barely any gold left in it. And when you devalue the currency, whose world are you destroying basically by devaluing a currency? Rich people. They have what I mean, whose wealth you're destroying? Middle class. But let's just go through one class of each class of society, right? So you're devaluing the currency as the Roman state. First, the rich people, let's talk about them. Their assets are mostly held in they're not, it's held in land, probably, shares of companies back then. It's not held in the currency. The poor people don't have much savings to begin with, so they're not affected by the currency devaluation much either. It's the middle class who has a bit of non-discretionary spending, but not enough to buy significant percentage of assets. And so they just save up that non-discretionary spending as savings, but which gets wrecked when the currency gets devalued. And so it's always the middle class that gets wrecked when you devalue a currency. It's never the poor. The poor never has non-discretionary spending to save. The rich have too much money. They'll now keep it in a currency that's fluctuating in value, and they'll keep it in assets that are a hedge against inflation. It's the middle class who has just about enough non-discretionary spending to keep in savings, but not enough to buy assets or a large number of assets. And it's always the middle class throughout history that got wrecked by currency devaluation. And so how did it end? Well, basically, people, when you destroy the middle class, they don't want to, surprise, surprise, fight your wars and side with you. And that's what happened. When the barbaric opened the gates of Rome, the Roman citizens welcomed them because they don't want to fight for the Roman government that basically uh, taxed them to poverty and devalued their savings. So they welcomed the barbarians through the gate of Rome. And yeah, by that, and then Rome burned, and that was the end of Rome. And through you can go through all empires throughout history. It has been the same pattern. The downfall of every prosperous society, every empire, every prosperous rich country, the downfall always began with destroying the middle class. And the destruction of the middle class always starts with either devaluing their savings or taxing them further, or both. Okay. If you devalue the currency, you're basically it's a form of tax. And yeah, you can after that, what happened? So the middle class got destroyed, Roman Empire fell. Then you're left with a bunch of peasants and kings of small states. And then that didn't last, obviously, because places like Mongolia, where Genghis Khan was coming up in the 13th century, they were very much in belief of working as a community, and they just were able to ransack their way through Europe because Europe by then Rome was done, Roman Empire was gone, middle class was destroyed. You were left with a bunch of states that had their own kings and own peasants and their own personal armies to protect their state lands. And it was easy for Genghis Khan and his Mongolian army, which worked as a huge big community, to just ransack their way through the small state capitals, state provinces, state armies. And that's what happened in Ukraine. That's what happened in Eastern Europe when the Mongolians came. So you might say, okay, we don't want to live under a big nation, empire state. We want to live in small provincial state with our own individual provincial armies. But in the long run, it's not going to work out because there will be a revolution going on somewhere else in the world, which will believe in the idea of community, working as a community, as a bigger community, and communism. And they will outcompete your small provincial state level army and state level economy, and they will wreck you. And so that's one example, the Roman Empire. Then we can come to the Ottoman Empire. And people talk about the decline of the Ottoman Empire. They didn't innovate their guns. They focused on these old technologies of using these long cannons, and they didn't, adopt to the new technologies that were coming around in the 17th, 18th century. But you have to ask yourself why they did not do that, right? Was it ego, or was there something else going on? So the Ottoman Empire, the rise of the Ottoman Empire started with the first 14th century, right? By that time, 14th, 15th century, they took over Constantinople. They've spread out through the Mediterranean. And so by 15th century, rich country, prosperous country, good middle class, solid middle class in Ottoman Empire. What happened then? Why didn't the Ottomans innovate and adopt and create new military structures to compete with the growing military innovations in Europe? Well, it's usually, as always, it's the same story. The middle class got wrecked. And how did the middle class get destroyed in that sense? We don't have good records about Ottoman currency and their devaluation. But what we do know is the Ottomans had a huge disdain for the Western Europeans who were trying to travel through Ottoman Empire and to go to Asia and trade with Asia. But the Ottoman Empire didn't like that. They didn't like the Christians. They were having all these problems with Christianity. And they basically forced banned their Ottoman traders, middle class Ottoman traders, from trading with Christian Western European countries. And the result of that was these Western European countries basically found a sea route to go to Asia, through Africa, right? And across Africa, not through. And in the process, Ottoman Empire lost a huge source of revenue that would have come by all these European migrating through their lands, going to Asia. And so there was that. And also the Ottomans, they did, so the first few Ottoman empires actually believed in meritocracy. They believed in the idea of promoting people based on merit. But after that, they stopped doing that. They focused more on promoting people based on bloodline and based on novelty. And that basically means you don't have people who are motivated to at least get into the middle class, right? The moment you get rid of meritocracy from a society, that's another way of destroying the middle class. So the Ottoman Empire actually, we don't have exact knowledge because there's not very good records of their currency and how it devalued. But what we do know is they made some fundamental mistakes by banning their middle class traders from trading with European Christian traders. And they also overnight, basically demoted their middle class people by basically getting rid of meritocracy and promoting people based on bloodlines and nobility. And yeah, it's the same story, nepotism as well. So the Ottoman story is a bit vague, but let's keep that aside. Now let's go to the British Empire, one of the most well-known empires. And yeah, it's the same story, the British people were living very miserable lives, and then they started, traveling the world, seeking out voyages around the world. And they came to India and they subdued India. They taxed it to infinity. They found this rich. Okay, so before we talk about the British Empire, let's talk about what we call the Mughal Empire. For those of you who don't know, the Mughal is an Iranian Persian word for Mongol. And the Mughals were basically descendants of the Mongols who established who established a monarchy in current day India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. And so when the Mughals first came to India, India had this beautiful middle class. India had 25% of the world's GDP. The Mughals came here. They were Muslims, but most of the middle class Indians were educated. They had good idea of finance. They had good idea of banking and creating businesses, but most of them were Hindus. Obviously, this Muslim Mughal Empire did not like the middle class educated Indians with a strong voice who were Hindus and they didn't like them because they were Hindus and they had beliefs that were contrarian to the Muslim beliefs, right? And it was hard as a Muslim ruler of a Mughal empire to control a population when a strong middle class has a religious belief that goes against yours, to put it simply. So what they did, obviously they taxed the middle class. And this actually goes back to an interesting story when, for those of you who don't know Robert Clive was the governor of the East India Company. And he basically, the way he promoted through the ranks was basically he fought a war, the Battle of Plassey in the Bengal Mughal Empire, and he won by bribing Mughal soldiers and generals. That's a different story. But an interesting part of Robert Clive's rise to infamy was that when he first wanted to battle the Mughal Empire in the Bengal Kingdom, he needed finance. He needed money. He needed to recruit locals. His British army was way too small to fight the huge Mughal Empire army in the Bengal Kingdom. Then he found the unlikeliest of allies in a local Hindu middle class banker in India. That middle class banker from a Hindu background had so much disdain and distrust of the Muslim Mughal ruler of Bengal that he decided to fund a foreigner to invade his own country. And so that's what I'm talking about. When you destroy the middle class is actually smart enough to see that you're destroying them. In many cases, they will rise against you, and in this case, sabotage you. And so the Mughal emperors, throughout their times in India, they were always focused on controlling the middle class, this educated, rich middle class that had very different religious beliefs to the Mughal Muslim emperors. Controlling this middle class was very important, and the best way you can control them is tax them, right? You tax them to poverty, basically. And once the Mughal emperors started doing that, they got pissed. They found an ally in Robert Clive. They funded his wars. Before you know it, Robert Clive was able to bribe many Mughal generals on his side, to his side, and before you know it, the Mughal Empire crumbled. And I think that's a good lesson for. Also, again, we come back to the same point. You attack the middle class, you ruin the entire country. Okay, so there goes the Mughal emperor and the empire, and now we come to the British Empire. So obviously, after conquering India, they went to they started looting the place, up and down, extracting as much resources as they could. I think with one estimate, they extracted as much as I think from current day's value, it would be around 20, 20 or $30 trillion worth of goods they extracted from the worth of goods they extracted from India. So yeah, it's a lot of money they extracted. But by the time the British Empire ended and we, the British went back, they had a prosperous middle class. Everything was good. They had a rich monarchy, but the middle class was strong. Okay. They used all their colonial holdings to enrich the middle class, the British middle class, and the middle class became prosperous. So even by the end of the Second World War, Britain's middle class was rich, prosperous, happy, with a strong purchasing power. We're talking about the 1940s. So what happened after that? The Second World War ended. UK was left with a huge tax burden. Okay, most of the huge debt burden because most of the war was funded by issuing new debt. And guess who bought up these war bonds? These bonds issued in wartime, this debt issued in wartime. Guess who bought them up? USA. Because USA now, at that time, had a growing middle class and a society and a wealthy government that was in position of enough wealth to buy this bond. So yeah, by the end of the Second World War, the middle class in UK, in Britain, was strong, rich, happy, but the UK government has racked up so much debt just to fund the Second World War. They had to basically, they were beholden to the interest of USA government and USA corporate and USA military because most of the debt was owned by USA. And so you, as a government, as the British government, you have so much debt to pay. How do you pay it? Okay, you just lost all your colonial holdings because USA said forced you to. You don't have this huge income stream. Okay, what do you do? What do you do? How do you fund this? How do you pay this debt that that USA now gave you? It's during the Second World War. Okay, you don't have the revenue from the colonies. You had to give them up because USA forced you to after the Second World War. And so what do? You tax the middle class. You don't want to, but you need to repay this debt that you owe to USA. And so what do? You tax the middle class. And that's basically what the UK government started doing, increasing the taxes. And before you know it, the middle class got taxed to poverty. And now you come to current day UK, where average British people cannot heat their homes, pay their electric bills, feed their kids. And this is a common phenomenon in current day UK. And we're not talking about poor British people, we're talking about middle class. Middle class got wrecked since the Second World War because of bad decisions taken by UK government during the Second World War. And was it intentional by British monarchy to basically, so that's pretty much what happened to UK and its middle class. Government took up more debt than it should have. And then basically the debt burden was left to the middle class to pay it off. The rich had, this complex financial holdings in this trust fund in this faraway island. They didn't want to pay, they couldn't tax the rich. The poor didn't have enough money to tax. So you end up taxing the middle class to get the revenue to pay the debts back to USA. So that's basically what destroyed the UK's middle class. And you're seeing the results of that right now. You know, UK streets have been burning the last few months. And people say it's communal violence. People say, oh, this is related to immigration, racial, and this is nothing to do with the growing inequality or the wealth gap. And I think people needs to get their priorities straight and just understand why these people are protesting. And if you focus on the fundamentals of why these people are protesting, it's not about communal violence or immigration. They're protesting because their living standards have declined significantly since COVID. And their living standards have declined significantly compared to their parents and their grandparents. And so the reason there was always immigration, there was always refugees in the UK, but the protest, there was always, a bit of heinous crime here and there by an immigrant here and there in the UK and in everywhere else around the world. But the reason this anger has flared up in UK society recently is because they are seeing their wealth decrease in real time. That right, decrease significantly in real time because the government just increasing the taxes and yeah, they want to scapegoat someone and they can't fight against the government because it's a faceless machine. So they have to scapegoat someone and burst their anger onto someone. So they chose the immigrants. So then you come to USA. I mean, USA was had the best middle class, the most powerful, rich middle class in the 1980s, 1990s. And so what happened to that? Well, I mean, again, you come back to the same story of devaluation of currency. US dollar was taken off the gold standard in 1971 because President Nixon wanted to spend more money fighting in the Vietnam War. And the only way he could do that without selling off any more gold reserve was to run a government deficit and to take US off the gold standard. And it sounds very complex. So basically, until 1971, every ounce of gold in the US vault could be bought for, I think it was $40 or something like that. So if you go to a US gold vault, if you give them $40, they are obligated to give you an ounce of gold, something like that. And obviously, if you're fighting a war and you're depleting your gold reserves at a fast pace, like US was during the Vietnam War, it's not a good sign. And so what do? You basically take US off the gold standard. So you can run these big deficits without losing your gold reserves. And that's basically what happened. And so I think just to clarify this point here, which is that so until 1971, let me just go through this again. So if anyone has any confusion. So as we were saying, so basically what happened there was until 1971, USA was on a gold standard. So if you go to any US gold vault, you could give us a specific amount of US dollars and they'll give you a specific amount of gold. So the rate, the convertibility between US dollar and gold was fixed. And for a certain amount of US dollar, the US Treasury was obligated to give you a certain amount of gold. And in that system, because USA was funding the Vietnam War with all this new issuance of bond, so all these foreign countries were basically cashing in on these bonds and basically converting them to dollar, then converting the dollar to gold. And so the US dollar gold reserves were depleting at a fast pace. And to stop that, basically, President Nixon decided they'll, they need more money to fight the Vietnam War. They need more debt, but they don't want people cashing in on those debt bonds and then converting the dollar to gold and then depleting the gold reserves even further. So Nixon decided to get rid of the gold standard in 1971, and overnight the middle class was wrecked in USA. And yeah, it since then it has been a steady decline. And people say the US middle class is very strong. I disagree. I think if you talk to people in USA, a carpenter with a normal salary could raise a family of four and five kids after before 1971, after 1971, and ever since then, two parents working full time still can barely can afford to raise one or two kids right now. And the reason is because the currency has devalued at such a fast pace that two parents' income is not enough to keep up with it. And yeah, so you're seeing the current effects of US middle class getting destroyed in real time. And so what does the future look like? Well, you just have to look at the past, right? When, you know, now you have Trump coming to power and he says he's a protector of the middle class. He's going to reduce taxes and so-called, he said he'll reduce inflation. I'm not sure that'll be possible anytime soon. But yeah, he said he'll reduce taxes and improve lives for the middle class, but he'll just be delaying the eventual outcome, right? So when Nixon took US off the gold standard in 1971, that was the first nail in the coffin for the middle class of USA. Ever since then, USA has run a federal deficit, I think in almost balance every year. They've run a deficit. And running a deficit means every year they added new money into circulation. And they've been adding more money into circulation than the rate at which new goods have been produced. And so the first nail in the coffin was the removal of the gold standard for USA. The second nail was running this deficit every year. And now the third nail and the final nail in the coffin will be the debt. It always comes back to the debt, like we talked about the UK. USA has racked up debt this year. They're paying close to $1 trillion in just interest on the debt. The population and GDP of US is not growing by any measure to pay back the debt or the rate increasing interest payment. So what they do, there's two options. They cannot, US Constitution has said this clearly, you cannot default on your debt. So they have two options. to pay back this massive debt. One is they monetize the debt, and the other is they increase taxes on the middle class to repay the debt. And this is where it gets tricky. So monetizing the debt means, basically in simple layman terms, you're printing more money to pay back the existing debt, but you're causing hyper runaway inflation in the process, and you're destroying the currency in the process. And the problem with monetizing debt is once the other countries find out that you have started to monetize your debt, they'll stop holding bonds and of your currency. I mean, it's common sense. Hey, I have a bond here that says USA will pay me back $100 in 5 years, 10 years term, but they started monetizing their existing debt. So yeah, sure, in 10 years, I might get this $100 back from USA, but that $100 will be after interest on that bond will be much lower in value because they started printing and devaluing the currency by monetizing their existing debt. So the problem with monetizing your debt is that other countries will pick it up and they'll start dumping bonds aggressively in the bond market. And for those people who don't know, US Treasury bond market is the biggest financial market in the world. It's bigger than the stock market. Okay. So that just gives you an idea of the size of the problem. Okay. The biggest financial market in the world is the US Treasury bond market. And so, yeah, the moment they started monetizing a bit of the debt in 2008, 2020, through what they call QE, quantitative easing, which basically means printing the money. And so when you monetize your debt, other countries will aggressively start dumping your existing bonds, and that will just crash the entire debt market. And once the debt market crash, it's over. Like at that point, it's over. Okay, people say, oh, your citizens will switch to using Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency. I don't think so. I mean, Bitcoin is a good store of wealth to make big purchases and all that, but to make day-to-day purchases, Bitcoin is not going to help because the transaction speed is not there. And on top of that, I mean, if you get rid of the dollar and you get rid of the Federal Reserve that controls the USD, then you it comes down to what happens to the middle class again. We're coming back to the core issue, which is the middle class. And like I said, American middle class, it's usually divided into different categories. The baby boomers, the Gen Z, the millennials. The baby boomers like real estate assets, stock portfolios, bonds. We're talking about the baby boomers. Okay, they like bonds, stocks, real estate. Then you have the millennials. They like a bit of gold, crypto. And then you have Gen Z. They don't have enough money to be considered to be in the middle class yet. And so what happens, right? In that situation, right? You are monetizing your debt, and then the intra-federal treasury bond market crashes overnight. What happens? You can't just switch to a cryptocurrency overnight. Yes, you can put Bitcoin into the Federal Treasury Reserve as part of the reserve holding. Sure, you can do that just like gold. But just like you can't use gold for everyday transaction, you cannot use Bitcoin. So monetizing debt is actually the worst case scenario, and it's unlikely the US government will allow that to happen because without the dollar, there's really not much they have left. Bitcoin is something out of their control, and it's a peer-to-peer system. They don't have much control over it. The US dollar is the only thing that's keeping the US empire alive right now, if you think about it. So what happens then? And what's the other option? So monetizing debt, that's worst case scenario. If that happens, the entire thing crumbles, the entire empire burns down. What's the other option? tax your citizens, raise more revenue to pay back the debt. And okay, that seems like a good situation, good strategy. But where do you get the money? Who do you tax? The rich, they're just like the British rich people. They're already storing their money in trust fund, in complex structures and all that. The poor don't have the money, enough money, any more money to tax. You'll go for the middle class. Whatever money they have left, you'll tax them to poverty. And yeah, that's when the once the middle class is over, the empire is over. And we talked about this one of the previous episodes where which is basically that so there are different indicators to measure how an empire is fading, or different indicators to measure the health of an empire. So you have education, military, innovation, science, technology, currency, financial institution. And when the empire is in a declining phase, the last indicator to decline, to fall off the cliff, will be, you guessed it, the currency. So the currency and the financial institutions are the last two indicators to decline. Okay. So before that, you'll see the military decline, the education decline, science and innovation decline, health decline, and everything else will decline before the if currency and financial institution decline. And the logic behind that is even the new empire will want to make use of this old empire's financial system before they can set up their own new financial system. They'll still need this old financial system to run things around. And I think that's the phase we are in right now. I mean, let's be honest, whether it comes to education, science, innovation. I mean, yeah, I know there's a lot of propaganda that goes out there that China is stealing all the technology from USA. And, I believe that's just the tip of the iceberg. Okay, I think if you look at society as a whole, China has in contributed more to society scientific innovation in the last 2 decades than USA has. I mean, yes, they've stole a few technologies here and there, but I think that's just the tip. Okay, of a, there's just a small problem, and there's just a small section of a population. So, like for example, like when they talk about how China is stealing our military technology designs and this design, that design, and this technology, that whatever. And just to give you some context, the China has this program called, I think it's called 1,000 or 1,000,000 bright minds or something like that. And it was basically a program to recruit people, go out in the world and find new technologies to bring back and apply to Chinese societal problems. And there were a lot of people who took advantage of this 1,000,000, creative bright minds program in China. And they basically went abroad, stole this technology, came back, they got money paid to them to bring this technology home. And they said they brought it by authentic means. They didn't steal it. But again, we're talking about 1,000,000 people. Right? China has a billion, 1.4 billion population. So a million program, okay, of 1,000,000 people. Some of them were bad who did this technology stealing out of a billion people population. That's less than 1%, right? Out of 1.4 billion. So, I mean, you don't have to look far. I mean, China has done so much new innovation in science and technology, in nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, and yeah, you can just read about it. And so, science and innovation, in my opinion, China has already overtaken the US. Education, I think it's fair to say that China has overtaken US. In terms of health, I would say they have overtaken US. And So I think finances and currency is the final front of this war. And how will it end? Well, I think that USA, it's now come to a point where basically USA has to decide on what do they do for the middle class, right? If they decide that they want to tax their middle class even further, tax them to poverty, to pay back the debt and to sustain this debt cycle, but in the process preserve the currency, reserve currency status for maybe a few more decades and thus preserve the empire for a few more decades. Or does an isolationist like Trump decide that, you know what, I don't care too much about US dollar. I care about my middle class people. I'll destroy the US dollar and I'll monetize my debt in the process. And I'll promote Bitcoin to my middle class people. So my middle class people don't get wrecked by holding US dollar. And I don't care if foreign countries don't buy any more new bonds from me because I'll basically learn to live on my own. I think that'll be a mistake if Trump goes down that path because once you basically monetize your debt and everyone dumps your bonds and you basically turn your backs on all the other countries, that's it. That's the end of the empire. Okay. Trump might say, okay, he'll tell the middle class, buy Bitcoin, convert all your US dollar savings into Bitcoin and other cryptos, don't hold any more dollar. I'm about to wreck the dollar. I'm about to monetize the debt. There, okay. And we'll switch all currency payments and every transaction to cryptos. So we avoid hyperinflation. We avoid destroying the middle class. But in the process, I destroyed the global reserve currency status of the US dollar and I destroy the Federal Reserve. Well, what's the benefit of that, right? The Bitcoin has a limited supply. Let's say Trump does that. Okay. What happens after that? Okay. In the future, if USA wants to borrow more money, who does it go to? How does it issue new debt? Who will trust it with any more new loans in the future? So that's a slippery slope once you go down there and to suggest that you're going to be so much independent as a country that you will never have to borrow another penny from. That's a bit hypocritical in my opinion. It doesn't work like that. I think what's more likely to work is uh transition if that happens, if Trump decides to monetize the debt and wreck the US dollar and the Federal Reserve, what's likely to happen is a transition back to how America looked like in the 19th century, which was all these states with multiple different banks, and all the different banks had their own individual currencies. So, if you read history about what USA looked like in the 19th century, they didn't have the Federal Reserve. This is interesting because the Federal Reserve was actually created in the early 20th century. And in the 18th century, you had a bunch of banks who were issuing their own currency. And so there were like, I think, hundreds of different currencies used across different states in different parts of US. And so I think we're going back to something like that. If Trump decides to destroy the Federal Reserve, monetize the debt, and destroy the US government's credibility as someone safe worthy to give loan to, then I think we'll go back to a situation where different crypto will be used in different states, different markets, different kind of transactions will be done in different kind of crypto. And I think that's where it could head if Trump decides to monetize the debt. I think what's most likely to happen, in my opinion, is I mean, yeah, Trump will try to pick a fight with Federal Reserve, he'll try to monetize the debt, but I don't think the Federal Reserve will do that, right? They'll not shoot their own foot. And I think what's likely to happen is 4 years will go by of Trump, and then they will get some crypto adoption in these 4 years. Crypto reserves probably might be added to the Federal Reserve. Uh, but I think this US dollar usage will not come to a halt. I think the debt will keep piling up. Sure, you can use Elon Musk and Vivek to cut down on some spending, but look, this has been tried. This is nothing new. What Trump is suggesting, it was been tried with Ronald Reagan. He ended with increasing the debt even further. So under Reagan, they did the same thing. Let's get government out of the way. Let's reduce spending. Let's reduce taxation. He ended up borrowing a lot of money under his term, under Ronald Reagan's term. So that's what I'm predicting. I think Trump will end up not being able to cut too much spending under with Elon and Vivek because most of the spending is actually approved by Congress, and you can come in and suggest a bit of government staff getting fired, but that's really not where the most of the spending is. Most of the spending is in interest rate, military, and social welfare, and these are long-term projects that are approved by Congress, and there are legal obligations to go through. You can't just get rid of them overnight. And so I think we'll end up with something what happened under Ronald Reagan, which is basically massive spike in the US debt, total debt. And I think Trump would actually like that. Okay. Trump doesn't like US dollar. He doesn't like the Treasury. That's pretty obvious. He doesn't like the Federal Reserve. And so you might want to just accelerate the process of destruction of dollar and just rack up more debt. So I think that's what's most likely to happen. He'll reduce taxation for the middle class. He'll reduce taxation for the middle class, and he'll try to cut some government spending here and there. But my prediction is overall the government debt will increase under him, and then we'll switch back to a Democrat. I think that's where we're heading, and this is actually the sign of a declining empire. So whenever, not just a declining empire, whether you're looking at a company that's in the decline or a country or an empire, if you that's in the decline, they all have one common characteristic, which is uh, a constant change in leadership. So the leadership is not stable, it's changing quickly. And I think that's where we're heading. I think, yeah, this you'll get 4 years of Republican Trump, obviously, but I think after that we'll go back to the Democrats, and then we'll switch back and forth. I, I highly doubt you'll see a Republican or Democratic Party leader complete consecutive 2 terms anytime soon, because the system, the way it's built, the way it's declining, I think you'll just go back and forth every 4 years. And so, yeah, then, just like the Roman times, the American Empire burns down. And so, yeah, I just want to sum it up here. And I think we talked about a very interesting topic. And look, I'm not trying to antagonize or incite any sort of revolution or anything. I just want people to be aware of the fact that middle class in any society is very important to have a strong consumer base, to protect democracy against upper elite corruption, to have innovation, to promote meritocracy, to promote merit-based hiring and promotion, and to basically preserve a society, right? Because, we can talk about how some societies everyone is treated more equally, and in other societies, you're treated like a peasant or a king based on how rich you are. And it comes down to the middle class, right? If you have a society with no middle class, and you go there, and you'll see that if you come from money, you're treated very differently than if you don't come from money. Compared to you go to a place where there is a strong middle class, and there you'll see that regardless of the amount of wealth you bring, yeah, they'll treat you more or less equally. And so yeah, Western countries, they're basically devaluing their currency at a speed where the middle class is getting wrecked in real time. And no one's talking about this. I don't know why. And then you have societies like India, China, is smaller ones like Bangladesh, Indonesia, Vietnam. The middle class is growing at the fastest pace in history. They're the leaders in middle class growth. Okay. They're also in countries like Nigeria and Africa. These countries are growing fast. The middle class is expanding at a fast pace. Okay, and they'll lead the future. If you have a strong middle class, you'll have a stable democracy, you'll have a stable society, you'll have a society with a strong purchasing power, and you'll have a government that's incentivized to not devalue the currency, okay, because there's a middle class to protect. So yeah, this all matters, okay, and you'll see that all the fastest growing middle class societies in Asia and Africa, they're joining BRICS because they want to protect their currency, because they want to protect the middle class. And so these are all very much connected. And I hope you guys like this series of videos that we talk where we talked about this, important topic. I've wanted to talk about this topic for a while. And I hope you guys, if you like this series, please like and subscribe this channel. And really, like my passion has been, ever since I left my job as a trader, I've the moment it took me a while. I've been, following global politics from a young age, but even for me, it took me a while living in Canada and then working as an energy trader. I realized how their society in Western societies have been declining at a fast pace. I saw it in real time. Okay. And working as a trader really gave me that first-hand glance at what this problem. Okay. You have these people from middle class background who are betting against their own people, who are trying to make some quick bucks from trading by pushing up power prices and basically betting against their own class of people. And I always tell the people you have more in common with the brown guy and the white guy of your own socio-economic class than you have with these upper rich elites. And I think people just, they're just blindsided. I don't know what, but like I said, you feel angry, you're seeing your wealth decline fast in real time. You need someone to scapegoat, you need someone to put the blame on. You can't go against the government. It's a faceless machine, especially in the Western countries. We've seen how the people have tried to rebel against the government in the UK, Canada, US to some extent. We've seen how that ended. Okay. And then on the other side, you'll see the Gen Z population revolting against the tyrannical government of Bangladesh in August this year, and how they succeeded. The, the Bengalis succeeded fighting against the government and winning. Okay, you can't do that in most Western societies because you still have this facade of democracy. That's, I think, something I want to talk before I end this video, which is that most Western countries still believe they have democracy. This facade of democracy is actually what's destroying the society even further in most Western countries. Okay, so you'll see a country like UK. Okay, a country like UK, a guy like Keir Starmer gets over two-thirds of the seats in the House of Parliament by getting about 30%, one-third of the population's vote. So you get one-third of the population's vote, but you get two-thirds of the seat. and you called it a democracy, right? And the same in Canada. A guy like Trudeau with about one third of the vote ends up forming a government. And I think this is okay. Then you come to USA, people talk about, okay, USA is different. Look, Trump won and all that. And look, we talked about Trump. I think Trump is just going to be a copycat of the Ronald Reagan. He's making big promises. I don't think he can make big changes. I think he'll just rack up government debt, maybe lower your taxes in the process, but I don't think he can make big changes because it's a fundamental flaws that cannot be changed overnight. And the only way you can change them overnight for a country like USA is by first you have to cut down the military spending aggressively. Okay? The current US military budget is $1 trillion. Bring it down to 200, 300. You can't do that. Okay? Because all these military equipments are so overpriced. If you bring it's it's gonna lead to a revolt. This, monopoly companies, military companies are not gonna allow you to bring the budget from $1 trillion to 300 billion. Okay, you're gonna have assassinations, bomb threats, and all that. Okay, we're already seeing that. It's not a conspiracy. This is just okay. It's the hard reality of life. Okay, you fight against this faceless system, and yeah, you wanna F around, you'll find out. And like, forget conspiracy, forget all that theories. It's just common sense, okay? You have only one company being able to provide a certain equipment, a certain part for the military. You'll go and tell them what? To to freak off? I mean, you can, but then where do you buy the part from for the military, right? And then you have these thousand such incidents where big military industrial monopolies has basically dominated the market for the military parts and equipments. So you cannot cut the $1 trillion military budget down to 300 billion because this includes this overpriced military equipment, the replacement parts, the overpriced service cost of this military equipment. Yeah, you know, let's talk about the army soldiers, US Army soldiers, for example, right? In many cases, and I think most of you guys know this, that for those of you who don't know, an army general, US Army general, and a US Army soldier gets paid more to work in an active war zone than he or she does by staying on the reserve on standby duty at home. So, as a US Army soldier, you have incentive. You want more wars because then you can be in active combat zone. You don't necessarily have to be in combat. You just have to be in an active combat zone. So you can rack up that extra salary and that extra bonus. Okay. And in many cases, we talk about significant amount of money, like a couple of hundred grand. And so will these US generals, US Army soldiers be okay with Trump reducing the number of wars America gets involved in? I mean, like we can ignore conspiracy theories, but it's all about incentives, right? Okay, when the incentive structure for the US Army soldiers is you get paid more if you're in an active combat zone, will you be incentivized or encouraged to not go to war? Or if you go to war, come back home early? You know, towards the end of the Roman Empire, I believe that different Roman legions fought each other more than they fought foreign countries. So you had different Roman army legions fighting each other rather than fighting foreign invaders. Okay. And the reason for that being because Roman army actually had a similar pay structure. If you went to war, you get paid more than if you were at home on standby. And so towards the when Roman Empire reached its peak and they were just about to decline, there wasn't much foreign wars to fight on. So, Roman legions, they lost a significant pay value, you know, pay structure because they weren't going to active combat anymore. And so they decided to basically fight each other and try to loot each other's cities. So a Roman legion from a certain province in will fight a Roman legion from another province, and they'll try to loot each other's cities. And that's scary. Okay, if you think about it, you might say, oh, that'll never happen to US. Well, you know, it, you say it never happens until it happens, right? People talked about how Trump will never come to power again. It's done for him. It's over. And then he came to power. Okay. And yeah, now people are talking about how Trump is going to end all wars and he's going to bring inflation down. He's going to reduce the debt. I call BS on all of that. He might reduce a few war conflicts, but even then, if he gets rid of all wars, even if he could, that'll lead to a revolt in U.S. Army. Okay, because like I said, the pay structure is incentivized, and more U.S. soldiers want to be in active combat zone because they get paid more. So yeah, this military budget is not coming down from $1 trillion anytime soon. Let's put it that way. The social welfare, well, these obligations are in some cases 20, 30 years, 40 years. Someone has paid into the social welfare obligations 40 years since they have started working, 40 years ago when they first started working. So these social welfare pension fund obligations are actually very tricky. And there's no way Elon Musk can deal with it. What else? The interest rate payment? What's Elon gonna do? Magically make them disappear? No. The interest rate payments will keep going up because as the debt piles up, any new debt issuance will have to be issued at the high interest rate unless you want more inflation on your stream. So basically, interest rate payments are not going down anytime soon. And so, yeah, I'm just being realistic. And I think the only option for America is in the short run, maybe not, it's not going to be politically accurate for Trump to tax the middle class, but he cannot monetize the debt either because he doesn't control the Federal Reserve. And as much as he wants to adopt Bitcoin as a federal, treasury reserve, I don't think it'll be widespread in usage simply because there are some technical limitations with Bitcoin to use it on a daily basis. And yeah, I think, like I said, when an empire or an organization is in decline, you usually have rapid and constant change in leadership. I think that's what US is going through right now. And yeah, how does this end? I don't know. I wish I knew, I wish I knew. Yeah, I don't know how this will end. And all I can tell you is one way or another, USA middle class is not going to get out of this situation anymore. Rich, Asia is definitely becoming richer, the middle class at least. And, as the middle class grows, the strength of the country grows. And yeah, I think the future belongs to Asia. And you might say I have a bias towards Asia because I'm Asian. But, it's strange because I've lived in the West, I've lived in the East, and I see such a contrast between those two regions. And yeah, it's one thing to read a book, see some Wikipedia facts and all that, but to actually live on the ground, it's a different vibe, and you can tell. I recently moved out of West. I've lived in the West very recently, and yeah, it's a society that's crumbling in all manners. It's degrading in all manners. I'm talking about the West. And then you have societies in the East that are they have issues, they still have flaws, but the middle class is always there to push back against any government tyranny, whether that was the BJP in India or the Awami League Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh or in China when Xi Jinping tried to over control, micromanage the population, middle class. During COVID, they came out on the streets. Indonesia, Vietnam are having a fast growing middle class. I mean, Nigeria is supposed to have the second or third largest world population by a few decades. And yeah, I think the future looks bright for Asia and Africa. And it's really a natural cycle of life. So yeah, that's it from this video. That's it from this series. And I'll come back with more videos, more topics to talk about. I think after this, I'll talk about some basic trading fundamentals. Someone requested that I do that. And yeah, I think my next few videos, I'll make a series on how I started trading. I'll talk about my history. I'll talk about what I know. I'll talk about the fundamentals of trading and what you should know if you're a beginner trader, and how you should prepare your mindset for trading, how to trade in different markets, how to trade different contracts. We'll get into all the nitty-gritty details, right? So that's it from today. Have a good night, and yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Peace.